So as you all people know, in the today's class, we need to start discussing about Appium mobile automation testing tool. So first of all, what we need to know is what exactly an Appium is, right? Even we need to know first of all what exactly an Appium is. Then only we can understand, right? So the first point of what we are considering out over here is what are the various requirements in selecting a tool. In selecting an open source tool. Right. So this is the first and most important thing which we need to know. So what are all the basic requirements we usually consider in order to test or else in order to choose an open source tool? Okay. So the first point of what we need to consider in order to choose an open source tool is I don't want to compile or modify the source code of the application. Whatever the application we are going to submit, the same app I need to test. This is a one requirement. So let me list down the requirements so that we can study in detail about this one. My tool should support simulators, emulators, and real devices too. Okay, whatever the automation tool I'm selecting, that tool should support simulators, emulators, and as well as real devices too. Written in Java so that it can support any framework and larger community support too. So whenever I'm selecting any kind of an automation testing tool, I usually consider these requirements. Okay, so these are all the various kinds of requirements of what I can consider on any kind of an automation testing tool. So it means I don't want to compile or modify the source code. Okay, so why we need to modify that? The simple point out over here is there are many open source mobile automation testing tools which needs compilation. Okay, which needs compilation or modification of the source codes before conducting testing and even after testing also. We need to remove those changes. Okay, we need to remove those changes from that particular application. Okay, we need to remove those changes from that particular application. So generally, what exactly these changes means? So few automation tools will need some kind of an instrumentation on that particular app. So in order to work on that particular tool means we need to inject some, okay, we need to inject some servers onto that particular automation tool. Okay, servers onto that particular app, whatever we have a design. For that reason, they need a compilation or the source code modification for the app, and then we are going to remodify that particular codes. It means in these cases, we are not going to test the application whatever we are going to submit to the Play Store. So we are doing certain modifications. Okay. So we are doing certain modifications here. Okay. To that particular tool, we are doing certain modifications. Fine. And then this is the first point. Whereas Appium is a mobile automation testing tool which doesn't need any kind of a pre-compilation to test that particular application. Whatever the source code, we are gonna submit to the Play Store. The same thing we are gonna automate. Okay, the same thing we are gonna automate. Like Robotium. Fine. Done up to here. And then, so the next one is Appium is a mobile automation testing tool which supports simulators, emulators, and real devices. Simulators means virtual device for iOS, and emulators means virtual devices for Android. So those simulators and emulators, those are not any original devices. So we are creating certain virtual devices, and in some scenarios we are going to test that particular application on those things. Okay, fine. So the next point of what we need to consider out over here is, okay, that's fine. We just specified this stuff, and then the next point of what we need to consider out over here is this should return in Java. Okay. Okay. Whatever the automation tool we are suggesting, it should return in Java. Okay. It should return in Java. So it means Appium is a mobile automation testing tool which supports multiple programming languages which are WebDriver compatible languages. Okay, which are WebDriver compatible languages. Using which programming languages we can write down your WebDriver program? The same thing we can write down using this Appium mobile automation testing tool. Fine. So here, let me consider this one as an explanation. So the point out over here is we can write a program in Java, .NET, Ruby, etc. And even, Selenium. Selenium is having a great support in various communities. The same way here, Appium is also having a huge amount of support for all the issues whatever we are encountering. Yeah, I'm recording this session. I will share you this recording. Okay, fine. That up to here. So these are all the basic things. And the next one is, what is an Appium? It is a mobile web, native, and a hybrid software application test automation tool developed and supported by SaaS Labs. So the meaning is, we can automate any kind of a web apps, native apps, and a hybrid apps using this Appium mobile automation testing tool. And the most important thing which we need to know about this one is, we can consider it the various kinds of advantages. Okay, the various kinds of an advantages is, it's a tool which supports cross-platform. So it means whatever the automation test scripts we have prepared, we can execute it against iOS and as well as an Android using the same API. So it means you no need to write down a separate code for both the Android and an iOS. The same code we are going to use it for both the Android and an iOS with a minute modifications. Or else we can consider it as with a very few modifications, we can execute the same code on a different operating systems. Okay, fine. Cool. So the next one is, Appium was built on, okay, Appium is basically an HTTP server. The first thing which we need to consider is, it's an HTTP server which was written in a Node.js, which will create and handles a WebDriver sessions. Okay, it's an HTTP server, or we can also call it as a web server. Okay, it can it's an HTTP server, or else we can call it as a web server too. Fine. Let me delete this diagram. I will rewrite these diagram once again. Fine. So it's just an HTTP server which follows a client server mechanism. Okay, which follows a client server mechanism. Okay, fine. And we had a basic introduction about a Node.js here. But another small point which we need to consider out over here with respect to Appium is, it supports to automate built-in applications in our mobile, like camera, alarm, etc. So what are all the features available in our mobile? Even we can automate those features using this particular Appium tool. Fine. And then another major advantage is, it will allows you to communicate with other apps like camera when we are working on real app testing. See, the simple point is, assume that I'm using, okay, assume that I'm using a WhatsApp. Okay, whenever I'm using this application, when we click on camera button, it will open up our mobile camera. So it means the app, whatever we are working on, has controls on the various system apps. Okay, Appium advantages. I simply marked this one as an Appium advantages. The first point. And then the next one is, what is an Appium? And the next one is, what exactly the most important thing which we need to consider about an Appium and how Appium was built. Guys, is this point clear for everybody so far? Or do you have any specific questions for me? Sridivya, Sweta, Uma, Vasim, is this point clear for everybody? You can reply me in a chat window. We have this chat option enabled. Cool. And then the next point out over here is the architecture of this particular tool. What exactly the architecture of this tool is? Let's study about this one. As I told you that Appium is an HTTP server, okay, or else Appium is a web server. So I'm marking it as a web server. Okay, it performs pretty much as similar to as a Selenium WebDriver. Okay, so here Appium works as a client-server architecture. The first point which we need to know about this Appium means it works as a client-server architecture. So here is my client and here is my server. So client, server. Code. Here the client means the code whatever we are returning, and the server means the Appium server. So whatever the code you have written in a client, it will request to the server and the server will send response back to this particular client. So based on this request, the server will interact with the devices like virtual devices, simulators, or emulators, right? So this is either simulators or emulators. Here these three devices are a simulators or an emulators. Here is a real device. So how this is going to work? As I told you that here this is a client server architecture. Okay, this is a client server architecture which internally uses JSON wire protocol over HTTP. Usually for the JSON wire protocol, let me make a note over here. For JSON wire protocol, the communication will happen with session IDs only. Okay, the communication will happen with the session IDs only. So it means whenever we got a request from the client, automatically the server will create a session and it will send back the session ID. Okay, it will send back the session ID to this particular code or else a client. Let me make a note out over here. Whenever the client sends a request, the server will create a session and it will send back session ID to the client so that the future communication between client and server will happen with this session ID only. Okay, with this session ID only. That's another point which we need to remember. But usually a simple question will rise in our mind. How come the server will identify which session it needs to create. The answer for this one is usually, okay, let me mark this as a question and let me mark this as an answer. Usually, the client has desired capabilities which we need to pass, using which the session will be created. So here it contains desired capabilities. So the desired capabilities, whatever the client is sharing, it contains, okay, the desired capabilities, whatever the client is passing, usually the desired capabilities contains automation name. If it is an IPM or a cell Android, we need to specify specifically the automation name, platform version, package name, activity name for an Android. There are certain things which we need to pass for the desired capabilities, using which, okay, using which our server can understand and it will establish, okay, using which our server can understand and it will create a session as per our requirement. Okay, as per our requirement. Cool. Guys, is this architecture clear for everybody? How this Appium is gonna work? Or do you have any questions for me on this? I'm updating this document. Is this point clear for everybody? You can reply me in a chat window, Sweta, Uma, cool. So guys, another small thing out over here is